David Banks, thank you so much for joining me on Cocktails and Convos. A pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure to be with you, Brother Sean. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
Oh, man, it's definitely a pleasure. So listen, before we get into our dialogue, it's only right that we toast, so I got a little something over here. I don't know what you got, but let us toast to our continuous pursuit of educational excellence while we lay the path for others to follow. Cheers.
Sounds good. Cheers, my brother.
So let's jump right in. You're an educational advocate, somebody who I admire, follow, respect. Describe what we are seeing now in our educational system. Do you think it represents right now the best we have to offer?
Well, certainly. Let me just start out by, first of all, appreciate you inviting me to be here, and I admire you as well. And I've watched your leadership, and I've watched you grow in this system, and we need brothers just like you to continue to provide what we need on behalf of our children and our families, number one. Number two, what we're seeing right now, and I've been in the school system well over 30 years, is something unlike, I think, anything I've seen before. There's a real lack of leadership that's happening right now, and it's very, very unfortunate. And here's what I mean by that. I think good people, well-meaning people, I think the mayor means well. I think the chancellor absolutely means well. But what is required in this moment is strong, visionary leadership to deal with an emergency situation and this national pandemic that has impacted all of our families right here in New York City. Yeah. And that leadership we're not receiving right now. And it's very unfortunate, right? So here, as we sit here today, one of the biggest failures is the fact that the mayor has outlined a plan for us to return to schools, and our middle schools and high schools are going back on Thursday, and elementary schools are going back tomorrow. But the planning that is really necessary to pull off something like this is lacking. Yeah. There are far too many steps that were missed to prepare for a successful and effective opening. I don't fault the mayor for wanting to pull this off, but I fault him for not ensuring that the level of preparation that was needed to make it happened, and it did not. And I think that's the problem. Having been a school leader for as many years as I was, and now running this Eagle Foundation for over a decade, I'm a person who very much believes in leadership, and because the people need somebody to follow and to be guided by. And what we're seeing from the mayor and the chancellor, this is bad. It's really bad, and it's not only unfortunate. It's a situation right now that I think people are really stressed out, and it didn't have to be this bad, but that's where leadership comes in. And if you don't demonstrate leadership, people just start to get completely stressed out, and the whole system goes into disarray.
Well, I'll tell you that stressed out piece, people are feeling that all over. Right. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it in my house as a parent of New York City public school children. I'm feeling it. My children are feeling it. And you talked about the planning piece, right? Yeah. It requires a lot of planning, and granted, planning has been happening, but I guess my mind goes to, but what planning? Like, what were we planning for?
Right. Yeah, listen, in order to do proper planning, you have to engage the right people in that planning. I kept saying, who's at the table as they're making these decisions? Decisions were rolling out, and I'm talking to principals. They didn't know anything about it. I'm talking to superintendents. They don't know anything about it. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. If the chancellor and the mayor are making these decisions, who are you talking to if you're not talking to the people that you're expecting to execute on a plan to move forward, and they're not even at the table? Right. I'm talking to school leaders and system leaders who are getting all their information by watching the mayor and the chancellor hold press conferences. Like, that's how they're finding out information. That's what I mean when I say fundamental lack of leadership, right? Sean, we start from the premise that there were no easy answers here.
Oh, not at all. Absolutely.
Right? Everybody recognized that. Mm-hmm. The pandemic was not the mayor's fault or the chancellor's fault. But it's a challenge. It's easy to be a leader when things are going well.
Oh, come on.
The test of leadership is when you have major challenges in front of you. And this is a major challenge, and they have failed so far because they have not engaged the right folks. They've not engaged. I'm a not-for-profit leader who works with thousands of young people in the system. There are not-for-profit leaders who probably touch half the kids in the school system. None of us have been asked to be at the table to talk about what it would really take to turn this around. I was asked to.
Right. How does leadership show up in times of chaos?
Absolutely. I was on the mayor's return to school committee. Mm-hmm. He brought about 40 leaders together from around the city. And they didn't listen to anything that we said. And the questions that they were asking us, they were asking us about how many times a day should the kids go to wash their hands? Should they eat lunch in the lunchroom or in the cafeteria? I said, why are you asking us that? You got here the president of Columbia University. You got the president of NYU, the head of Children's Aid Society. Ask your principals.
Principals.
That. You should be asking us, how do we expand New York City's footprint for schools? If you know that you can't bring all the students back at one time, well, what about getting access to the New York Public Library, the local YMCA, local churches and houses of worship, where you could perhaps bring back even more students if bringing them back was what you determined to be the best course of action?
How do we recruit more qualified teachers to support the need?
Absolutely. There's so many open-ended questions that they never really dealt with. And then you have all of these delays, and the delays were not based upon the fact that you're getting new information. You know, I said the other day, I said that the mayor and the chancellor are demonstrating a level of leadership because they are failing to see the obvious that's in front of you. Some of these are just obvious things that you should have anticipated months ago. This is not new information. So all of that together, as far as I'm concerned, they should have made a decision that they made in Chicago, that they made in San Francisco, that they made in Los Angeles, which is, we don't know enough. We need to be better prepared. We're going to go all virtual. We'll keep some schools open, much like we did in the early part of this pandemic with these regional enrichment centers. Let's make sure that we can expand those a little bit, go deeper with that. But really make sure we're spending all the time that we need necessary to give our teachers the level of professional development and training that they need so that we can take virtual learning to a whole nother level. Because once the pandemic subsides, virtual learning really should be here to stay anyway.
It absolutely should be.
Right? And so it would have behooved us to really get that right. So what we found ourselves in the middle of now is a situation where we're not doing any of it right. And so we're not getting any real benefit from it at all. The mayor was determined to do this, didn't put in the time, effort, and energy to make sure he did it really well. And now we're all going to suffer as a result.
And I'm going to say this, and I hate to say it, but you know what? Like I'm a part of the system, right? I'm a part of the system, and just to be totally transparent, look, people are going to be mad at me, but I'm appalled by the fact that our number one priority, like our number one highest level of expectation at this point, is to ensure that we have bodies in front of our children.
Right.
And even saying it makes my blood boil, because it's not just about having bodies in front of our children.
That's right.
We need qualified people in front of our children who are going to nurture them, pour into them, love them, provide them with trauma-infused support and social emotional supports to get through this thing together. What's a body going to do?
They're saying we're getting 3,000 more, 5,000 more, 8,000 more. I mean, where are you getting these people from? We're just pulling people from off the sidelines, even if they were retired teachers, even if they're people who are working in central offices, to just overnight say, we're pulling you and we're putting you in buildings. That's what you mean when you say bodies. Teaching, that's not what teaching is.
No, it's not.
Teaching is built on relationships. Imagine I'm putting you in a classroom or even virtually in front of 20 of my children, and they have no idea who you are. And now you're here just for a period of time so that we can say, there's a class that's covered. I don't even know that they're lining this up based upon your content background or your content expertise. They're just putting bodies in rooms to say that we have it covered. That's not what education is. And that's, again, another example of what I mean, Sean, when I say the failure of leadership. This is not the way to do this. This ad hoc, just throwing stuff together. This is not the way the system is supposed to operate.
Yeah, we got to do better. We got to do better. Man. Let's shift because we can stay there all day, right? and poke holes. But I really want us to get to some different layers of fruit. I want us to find some fruit that we can serve up in a little bit. But so granted, in 2004, you opened the first Eagle Academy. What compelled you or motivated you to do that specific work?
I had already been a New York City school principal for 7 years when I became the founding principal of the Eagle Academy for Young Men, which, by the way, Eagle Academy was the first all-boys public high school in New York City in 30 years when we opened our doors. We knew that. What we didn't know, Sean, was that there were no other all-boys public high schools in the country when we opened, right? Back in 2004. Amazing. Single-gender public schools have become politically incorrect. The reason we opened, and I say we, because this was not the David Banks story. I'm a member of the 100 Black Men of New York. It was our organization. This is a civic organization of professional men, was started almost 60 years ago by people like David Dinkins and Congressman Charlie Rangel and Percy Sutton and other real luminaries, Roscoe Brown, Tuskegee Airmen. Like, these were great men. We stand on their shoulders. And our organization decided to meet this challenge because we had always mentored young people. We'd always given out money for scholarships and that kind of thing. But we started looking at some data. And there were 3 very critical pieces of data that really were the impetus for us to start Eagle Academy. One was that the graduation rate at that time was only 32% for young men of color. Now think about that, 32%. That means like 7 out of 10 of our young men were not even going to graduate from high school. Wow. How in the world can they make themselves available for opportunities in industry or business or anything else when the system can't even graduate them from high school? So that was number one. Number 2 was the fact that 68% of Black boys were growing up without a father at home. Right? Like, this hip hop generation, by and large, has been a fatherless generation. And that is because of the so-called war on drugs, war on crime, right? Which really marked the beginning of the mass incarceration of men of color, right, removing them from their families. And it was the sons who suffered the most, not having fathers in their households to help them in that transition from boyhood to manhood. And then finally, Columbia University put out a report where they said 75% of the state's prison population were coming from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. Again, you got to think about that for a minute. The entire state of New York, 75% came from 7 very specific zip codes in New York City.
That's some ugly
it's the school to prison pipeline, right? And so people were writing books about it. They were analyzing data. They were doing all that stuff. And it seemed like the most you could hope for was a good after school program for 20 kids. That was as good as it got. That's the reason why we said we're in the midst of an emergency. We have to lean in and do more. We didn't have all the answers, but what we had was the courage of our conviction to try and do something. And that's the reason why we launched the Eagle Academy. And that work, and I was asked to be the principal when I left my other school to head up Eagle. And from there, we have since gone on through the work of the Eagle Foundation, which I head now, to open up a school in every borough in New York City. 3,000 of these young men in our schools today, over 2,000 who graduated and gone on to colleges and universities. And now we're spreading our work nationally, helping school districts around the country figure out how to either open up an all-boys school like Eagle, or otherwise, and more importantly, teachers who are sitting in classrooms with boys and girls but have no idea how to engage these boys. How do we reverse that trend by giving them the level of professional development and best practices for the most promising ways to engage young men in the classroom? That's been the work that we've been engaged in.
Well, look, I applaud that work. Look, I've been watching that work for years. I remember coming to see you in the Bronx, and And myself, having 20 plus years working with middle school age children, I knew like that the boys needed something different. My boys needed something different. My girls did too. But but we gotta tailor to those needs. I used to actually have these powerful all boys forums for my kids. I even had single gender classes so that I could tap into my boys' excellence, their magic, but also tap into my girls' excellence and magic too. So what the Eagle Academy stands for, I absolutely applaud that work and salute you for that. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to be right back with the people want to know. So we are back with the people want to know, and we know that's just a segment where we just take random questions from around the city. So we're going to start with James from the Bronx. Mr. Banks, I need you to help me out with these questions. You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. So James from the Bronx wants to know, can we just skip to December 31st, 2020?
Hey, man, listen, tell James I'm with him as well, right? It's been a rough go. This promises to be the most difficult and challenging year that we have had. Hopefully we're going to have a new administration in Washington. Not only fingers crossed, but folks have got to come out and vote.
Absolutely.
Right? And make that happen, because December 2020, 31st, still represents the same thing if we don't get out there and get involved and make it happen. So we can't just dream it, wish it. We have to make it happen. One of the things we saw recently with the NBA, these guys are walking around with the shirts on and vote and enough and all of that. And all of those things are great, right? But again, they're symbolic moves. And they found out that only 20% of the NBA players are even registered to vote.
How crazy.
Let me just think about that. So I can only imagine the numbers are probably similar with the NFL players as well. So all these guys taking the knee, we down with Kaepernick, all of that, but they're not even registered to be in the game. See, so it's more than just hoping for a new day. There are things that we have to do to be in this game and to be prepared to make the kind of change that we want to see happen. And that goes beyond the rally, beyond the protest. Then there are some real next steps that we have to take. And those are things that we need to be doing. And voting is number one.
James, you heard it. We got to get out there and we got to vote. And not just vote, but vote with a plan. Vote with an agenda in place. Get out to the polls, but make sure you got a plan in place so that your vote really means something. And then hold those elected officials accountable too. So, James, you heard it. We can't just skip. We wish we could, but we can't. But get out there and vote to make change. All right, so look, this one's from me. This for me. I know you represent Southeast Queens. Where's the best place to eat in Southeast Queens? I'm hungry.
You know, that's funny. That's a good question. We'll probably have to check with my brothers on that. I haven't been. I grew up, but I left when I was about 18 years old. Okay. So some of the spots that I was hitting back then are long gone.
Might not be the same spot.
Right. But you know, I spend most of my time in Harlem now. That's where my office is.
Right.
And Red Rooster is certainly my favorite spot on the Harlem scene. Marcus Samuelson up there. And,
that's definitely one of my favorite spots too. I love that spot.
Yeah. But you know, there's all kind of great restaurants depending upon what you like to eat. And my brothers are still in the Southeast Queens area. So I'll get back to you with the Southeast Queens favorite spots.
Yeah, hit me up. Let me know.
Will do.
Okay. Tamika from Queens. Her son is in the 7th grade, has an IEP, is struggling academically. Please help. What advice would you give to Tamika?
You know, again, we hear that a lot, right? But it's all about the connection with the school, right? So is it Tamika?
Tamika, yep.
Tamika, yeah. Tamika, school works for the parents who get most involved and hold the schools accountable, right? So you've got to make sure you're building a strong relationship with the principal, a strong relationship with each one of your child's teachers. A lot of times we get caught up talking about the system as a whole, and I certainly do that. But you as a parent, Tamika, you're not sending your child to a system. You're sending your child to a very specific school.
Bingo.
And you need to be involved. They need to know who you are. you need to be the biggest advocate for your child.
Yes.
Not to say that it's going to be easy, right? I don't know the particulars around what his IEP it represents, but I do know that whether your child has an IEP or does not have an IEP, the children that get the most out of their school experience are when their parents are actively engaged and involved and hold that school accountable for delivering on what they're supposed to deliver for your child. It would be great if everybody got what they were supposed to get. That's not always the case. And so, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so you've got to stay very active, very engaged, and making sure that they know who you are and that you're holding them accountable. That's
Absolutely.
Always the best way to get started.
Tamika, you heard it from Mr. Banks. You got to get involved. And Tamika, don't assume that they know what the issue is. Like, reach out to them, communicate as often as you can with the teacher, the principals. Let them know exactly what your child needs to be successful. And then something, Sean. There are a lot of Tamikas out there, and they love their children and they want the best for them. And I hear those questions a lot. And then we'd ask the school, and the school would say, "Man, she dropped that child off 3 years ago. We haven't seen her since. She doesn't come to any PA meetings. She doesn't show up here. Like, we barely know who she is." That's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that that's Tamika. I'm just simply saying that's what you have to do. You have to stay engaged. I was a very good student as a child. And yet my father was at that school all the time. He didn't take anything for granted. In every grade, from first grade, at least all the way through middle school, my dad was always around. And everybody knew him. They knew my mother as well, but my dad was a police officer. Right.
So he would just show up, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. But they knew who he was, and he held not only the school to account, but he held me to account, right? To make sure that I was holding my end of the bargain as well. The success in school is a joint partnership between the school, the parent, and the child. Everybody's got to do their part.
Absolutely. Everybody has a part to play. You heard it, Tamika. You heard it. Look, we're going to just continue on with our dialogue. So we know that things need to change. Speak specifically about what you believe our system needs right now.
The pandemic notwithstanding, we are not doing right collectively by our children in our public school system. And there's some very specific things that we have to do to change it. So when I say we're not doing right, here's what I mean. We do a really good job, Sean, of schooling. We don't do a great job of educating. And there's a difference.
About that.
So a year ago, I was watching on TV and I saw all of these young people all across America hitting the streets, standing up about climate change, essentially saying to all adults and the powers that be, we're the young people, we're the people that are going to inherit this planet Earth. And you adults are screwing it up and you're going to make it really bad for us. And we've got something to say about that. And I was so inspired to watch all of these young people right out there on the front lines, letting their voices be heard and speaking truth to power. But when you skimmed it, you realize, I said, where are the children of color? Where are the Black kids? They were almost nowhere to be seen.
Wow.
And you know what I realized, again, I already knew it intuitively, but to see it in that moment, it was all these white kids who are being prepared for leadership. And where were the Black kids? They were in school doing their work. You see what I mean? So this whole notion around doing my work. Most of us as parents, we ask your child when they come home from school, how was school? Fine. Right? Because they're going through the good, right? They're going through the routine of school.
Right.
They're not engaged in stuff that is deeply thought-provoking and that ultimately prepares them to be game changers down the line. They're not getting that kind of exposure. When Bill de Blasio became mayor of New York City, you know that he won with only 14% of eligible voters even voting? People don't vote in presidential elections. They don't vote in state elections. They don't vote in municipal elections, city council elections. Sometimes it's just a few hundred people that even come out to vote. Why is that? We're not preparing people to be active, engaged citizens because we're not giving them those kinds of experiences throughout their K-12 experience.
Which could absolutely happen in the school system.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what should be happening. Imagine if your son or daughter was coming home and saying, hey, Dad, what kind of healthcare system, what kind of healthcare plan do you have? Because in school, we're studying the healthcare plans across America, and we're comparing it to those in Canada and Sweden to try to determine who has the best healthcare system in the world, and what can we do here in America, right? Kids are not learning how a bill is passed. They're not learning how money is made in this country, how to become an entrepreneur and start your own business. They go literally from kindergarten through the 12th grade. We as taxpayers have spent over $300,000 in New York City alone, which is not even enough money. But if you use that as a baseline, $300,000 per child. And most of these kids can't even tell you what a city council person does. They barely can tell you the difference between an assemblyman, a congressperson. When I used to watch the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and he would do this walk down Hollywood Boulevard, stopping ordinary Americans and asking them very basic questions, and they couldn't answer them. And people got a laugh out of it. But think about it, it's a sad indictment. All these people are high school graduates, but we're not preparing our people to really be woke and to understand what's really going on. That's how a Donald Trump can come into our midst when you have a populace which is essentially asleep because the school system has done little to nothing to prepare them to be woke, number one. Number two is the notion of teaching the truth in American history, right? The story of Black folks in this country is something that everybody needs to know.
1619 Project is one way.
Absolutely. The 1619 Project is a place we can start, right? Skip Gates has done so much out of Harvard, right, with this work. The resources are there. What we need is a system that will ensure that happens. And so Black folks need to know who we are, because when you know who we are, the contributions we made, and we weren't just slaves, and then there was the civil rights movement, right, and Martin Luther King, that we are so much more than that. When you know that, you're filled with a sense of pride, which gives you that fuel that you need to go on to drive toward excellence. But also, all the other folks need to know who we are. They need to know that we fought, bled, died, and built this country. Absolutely. America became a super economic power on the backs of free labor over hundreds of years that no other country had that. That's why America is what it is today. But when folks don't understand that, then that's what allows somebody to put their knee on your neck for 8.5 minutes until the life goes out of your body, because he doesn't even see you as somebody who has any worth at all. Our school system also has a level of accountability for that, because we're not teaching anybody